Laura Bennett and Officer Mark Daniels never imagined a normal school night would turn into a nightmare. One teacher's breakdown and a single misstep in the science lab left a seasoned cop fighting for his life and a quiet town shaken to its core. What really happened behind the closed doors of Brookfield High? In the small, peaceful town of Brookfield, everyone knew everyone. The streets were lined with tall oak trees, the shops closed early, and crime was so rare that most people didn't even lock their doors. It was the kind of place where life seemed calm and predictable. Among the townspeople was Laura Bennett, a high school science teacher admired by students and respected by parents. She had taught at Brookfield High for nearly 15 years, always patient, always professional. Her students described her as the kind of teacher who made science feel exciting. She organized experiments, stayed after class to help, and volunteered for school events. On the surface, her life looked perfect, but beneath that calm image, something had started to crumble. A year earlier, Laura's husband had suddenly left her. The divorce had drained her savings and shaken her confidence. To make things worse, the pressure at school had been building. The administration had cut funding, increasing class sizes and workloads. Students became more difficult to handle, and the once passionate teacher found herself losing patience. She started staying late after school, not because she wanted to, but because she couldn't bring herself to go home to an empty house. Her colleagues noticed she looked tired, her hair unkempt, and her smile forced. She sometimes forgot assignments or repeated the same lesson twice. When asked if she was okay, she would just nod and insist she was fine. But at night, in her empty living room, Laura sat staring at stacks of bills and unfinished lesson plans. She had begun keeping a private journal where she poured out her thoughts, frustration with her job, fear of losing control, and a growing suspicion that someone at the school was trying to ruin her career. As the weeks went by, her paranoia deepened. She started hearing faint whispers in the hallways after everyone had gone home. Papers from her desk went missing, and she blamed the janitor, then her students, then her own memory. Her world was becoming smaller, darker, and more confusing. Yet she continued to teach, pretending nothing was wrong. Then, one rainy Monday morning, Laura didn't show up for class. The principal called her phone several times, but there was no answer. Her car was still in the school parking lot, unlocked. By sunset, flashing police lights filled the quiet campus. No one could imagine that the woman who had once inspired her students was now at the center of a mystery that would soon shock the entire town. The call to the police came just after sunset. The school janitor, Harold Jenkins, had been locking up when he heard a loud crash coming from the science wing. Thinking a window had broken, he went to check but stopped when he heard what sounded like muffled screams. Terrified, he ran outside and dialed 911. Within minutes, Officer Mark Daniels arrived at the scene. He was one of the most trusted officers in Brookfield, known for his steady nerves and years of experience. When he pulled up, the school building loomed dark and silent against the stormy sky. Rain dripped from the roof as he stepped out of his car and met the trembling janitor. The front doors were unlocked. Mark entered cautiously, flashlight in hand, as the sound of dripping water echoed through the hallway. The air inside was cold and heavy. Rows of lockers stretched into the darkness, their metallic surfaces reflecting the narrow beam of his light. The smell of chemicals hit him as he approached the science lab. A faint humming sound came from inside, the kind made by electrical equipment left running. The floor was scattered with shards of glass and papers that fluttered slightly in the draft. He noticed footprints leading deeper into the lab. One set belonged to a man's boots, the other smaller, possibly a woman's. His radio crackled, but before he could respond, something clattered behind a table. He turned sharply, his flashlight sweeping across overturned stools and smashed glassware. Then he saw movement in the corner. A figure was crouched near the cabinets, barely visible. He called out, stepping closer, his hand resting on his holster. The figure moved suddenly, knocking over a metal stand. The next few moments were chaos. A shadow darted forward, and before Mark could react, something heavy struck him on the side of the head. His flashlight fell, rolling across the floor as his vision blurred. He staggered, trying to stay upright, but the world spun violently. A sharp chemical smell filled the air, burning his throat. His last conscious thought was of flashing lights reflecting off broken glass. When backup arrived 10 minutes later, they found the science lab in ruins. Officer Daniels was lying motionless on the floor, his breathing shallow. A pool of spilled chemicals surrounded him, their colors blending in the dim light. The room was silent again, except for the faint hiss of a broken gas valve and the steady hum of danger that still lingered in the air. When emergency responders arrived, they immediately rushed Officer Daniels to Brookfield General Hospital. He was unconscious, with a head wound and signs of chemical exposure. The sight of a respected officer being carried out on a stretcher sent shockwaves through the quiet town. The school was sealed off, and investigators began combing through every room. The chaos in the science lab suggested more than an accident. Something deliberate had taken place. But there was no sign of forced entry, no stolen property, and only one set of fingerprints on the broken glass, those of Laura Bennett. Her sudden disappearance made her the prime suspect. Her car was still in the parking lot, keys in the ignition, and her handbag lay under her desk. It was as if she had vanished in the middle of preparing for class. Detectives searched her classroom and discovered her private journal hidden inside a drawer. The entries were deeply unsettling. They started as typical reflections about her lessons and students, but gradually grew darker. She wrote about being watched, about someone tampering with her experiments, and about strange voices calling her name in empty halls. The last few pages were filled with erratic writing lists of people she no longer trusted and notes about a plan to expose whoever was targeting her. The police realized they were dealing with more than a missing teacher. They began tracing her movements from the previous day and found that she had stayed at school long after everyone left. Security footage showed her walking down the hallway at 8:47 p.m., carrying a box of lab materials. After that, the cameras went dark. Someone had placed tape over the lenses in the science wing, something Laura herself could have done. While Officer Daniels fought for his life in the hospital, investigators gathered evidence from the scene. Chemical residue from the lab was sent for testing, and it revealed a mix of compounds that, when combined, could create toxic fumes. The evidence suggested that Laura had been conducting an experiment gone wrong, or perhaps something far more dangerous. Theories spread quickly across town. Some believed she had snapped under pressure, others thought she had been framed. But one fact was certain: the teacher everyone trusted had become the center of a mystery that was quickly spiraling out of control. 2 days passed with no sign of Laura Bennett. The entire town of Brookfield remained on edge, as police officers scoured every corner of the area, questioning neighbors and checking local businesses. Then, a tip came from an unexpected source, a farmer who lived near the old river cabin at the edge of town. He reported seeing a woman matching Laura's description walking through the woods late at night. The cabin had been abandoned for years, hidden among dense trees and tall grass, making it the perfect place to hide. Police units moved carefully, aware that the suspect could be dangerous and unpredictable. They approached the cabin silently, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The front door was slightly ajar, creaking as it swung in the wind. Inside, the cabin was dimly lit by the moon streaming through broken windows. Dust coated the furniture, and the floor was littered with leaves and debris. Officers noticed recent signs of habitation: empty food cans stacked in a corner, a threadbare blanket on the floor, and torn papers scattered across the table. On closer inspection, the papers revealed something alarming. They were photographs of students from Brookfield High, each with handwritten notes beside them. Lines of text suggested that Laura had been tracking certain students obsessively, marking who she suspected of interfering in her life. It was clear that her paranoia had escalated beyond private thoughts. She had taken action, compiling evidence to support her fears. As officers moved to check the back of the cabin, they heard faint noises from the attic. Carefully climbing the narrow wooden stairs, they found Laura sitting cross-legged, staring at the wall. Her eyes were wide and unblinking, her hands shaking slightly. She appeared exhausted, disheveled, and completely detached from reality. There was no attempt to resist as officers gently guided her down the stairs and out of the cabin. Once in custody, Laura was taken to a nearby psychiatric facility for evaluation. Psychologists determined that she had suffered a severe mental breakdown, brought on by months of stress, isolation, and obsession. She had not planned the attack on Officer Daniels in advance. Her actions in the lab were the product of confusion and fear. The town struggled to reconcile the image of the teacher they had admired with the woman who had caused chaos and fear. Families whispered in disbelief, and students avoided the school, uneasy about returning. For Brookfield, the revelation that someone so familiar and trusted could hide such turmoil was deeply unsettling. It became clear that the quiet town was not as safe as everyone had believed, and the story of Laura Bennett's unraveling would leave a lasting mark on the community for years to come. Even after Laura Bennett was in custody, questions about the events in the science lab lingered. Forensic experts continued their investigation, determined to uncover the exact cause of Officer Daniels' collapse. Laboratory tests revealed a startling discovery. The combination of chemicals Laura had been using created toxic fumes when mixed. The compounds had reacted in a volatile way, producing a gas that could render someone unconscious within minutes. Traces of the same fumes were found in Officer Daniels' system, explaining why he had been incapacitated so quickly. It became clear that the head injury he sustained was compounded by chemical exposure, making the attack far more dangerous than anyone initially realized. Psychologists and investigators worked together to piece together the sequence of events. Laura's journal and the notes found in the cabin painted a chilling picture. She had believed that someone at the school was deliberately sabotaging her experiments, monitoring her every move. In her state of paranoia, she had spent hours mixing chemicals in the lab, convinced she needed evidence to protect herself. When Officer Daniels arrived, she interpreted his presence as a threat, and panic overtook her. The combination of fear, exhaustion, and chemical exposure resulted in the violent incident that left the officer hospitalized. Officer Daniels survived after several weeks in the hospital, but his recovery was long and difficult. He suffered memory gaps about the night of the attack and recurring headaches from the exposure. Though grateful to be alive, he struggled to process the fact that someone he had trusted, a teacher he had known in the community, had unintentionally caused such harm. For him, the experience was a stark reminder of how fragile safety could be, even in a familiar place. Laura Bennett was found unfit to stand trial and committed to long-term psychiatric care. Experts concluded that her mental state had deteriorated gradually, fueled by personal loss, workplace stress, and mounting paranoia. She was no longer capable of distinguishing reality from her fears, and the lab incident was the tragic culmination of months of psychological decline. Brookfield struggled to recover from the shock. Parents kept a closer eye on their children, and students were wary of returning to the science lab. The story of Laura Bennett circulated as a cautionary tale. Even the most respected and calm individuals could harbor struggles that went unnoticed. The community was left grappling with the unsettling realization that a seemingly ordinary teacher could, under extreme pressure, spiral into chaos, leaving a lasting impact on the town and its sense of safety. The incident became part of Brookfield's history, a haunting reminder of how fragile the line between normalcy and disaster could be.